My friends, if there is one thing life has taught me over 95 years on this earth, it is that crises have a strange way of revealing the truth. They strip away illusions, tear down the noise, expose weaknesses, and uncover strengths we didn't even know we had. But they also do something else, something very few people ever learn to recognize. Crises reveal opportunities that do not appear in ordinary times, and if you understand how to walk through fear instead of running from it, you can build not just a first fortune, but a second one. Let me start with something honest. People look at me today and they see success, they see wealth, they see stability. But what they don't see, what they forget, is that I have lived through more crises than most people can imagine. I'm not talking about small dips or bad days. I'm talking about moments where the world shook so violently that even the strong panicked. I've watched markets collapse overnight. I've watched businesses evaporate in front of their own owners. I've watched fear spread from one room to another like a wildfire, and I have lived through moments where I myself sat alone, asking whether the decisions I made would hold up in the morning. People imagine that I have always been calm, but calm is not something you are born with. Calm is something you earn by going through chaos enough times to understand how it behaves. I faced my first real financial crisis long before most people even knew my name. It was in the storm of the 1950s, and I was a young man with barely any capital, barely any recognition, and barely any experience. But what I did have was obsession with learning, obsession with studying businesses, obsession with understanding value. I spent hours in libraries when others were out enjoying their evenings, and during that period I discovered something that would later become one of the pillars of my entire life. I learned that fear creates mispricing. People don't think rationally during crisis. They don't calculate. They don't analyze. They don't pause. They react. And reactions create mistakes. And mistakes create opportunities. And opportunities, quiet ones, overlooked ones, uncomfortable ones, are where fortunes begin. There is a moment in my life I rarely talk about, but you need to hear this, because without this moment, I would not be the person you are listening to right now. It was during the recession of 1957. I was running my partnership, but I was still young, still proving myself. The market was sinking, investors were nervous, newspapers were shouting about recession, about unemployment, about crisis. And one morning, I woke up to a letter from one of my partners who wrote, "Warren, should we pull our money out before we lose everything?" I was 26. Not a billionaire, not a legend, not a man who had proven anything yet. And for the first time, I felt something rise inside me. Fear. Not fear of losing money. Fear of letting people down. Fear of making the wrong call. Fear of being wrong when it mattered the most. I sat with that letter for hours. I didn't eat. I didn't leave my chair. I stared at the words until the ink felt like it was staring back at me. And then something happened, something that changed my thinking forever. I realized that crises are not financial events. They are emotional events. The numbers don't collapse. The businesses don't vanish. The factories don't disappear. The customers don't evaporate overnight. What collapses first is confidence. What disappears first is patience. What evaporates first is logic. And it was in that moment, that single uncomfortable morning at the age of 26, that I made a decision that shaped my entire future. I would learn to stay calm when others were drowning in noise. I would learn to study businesses while others were studying headlines. I would learn to think independently even if the entire world disagreed. And that became the foundation of everything I built, but it wasn't the last crisis, not even close. I lived through the crash of 1973-74, when the market fell nearly 50% and even the best investors questioned their sanity. I lived through the panic of 1987, when markets fell 22% in a single day. I lived through the dot-com bubble, where people believed profits didn't matter. I survived the storm of 2008 when banks were falling apart like old buildings, and I lived through 2020 when the world shut down in a way none of us had ever seen before. Every crisis came with fear. Every crisis came with doubt. Every crisis came with a moment where I had to choose. Do I follow the crowd or do I follow the numbers? And my friends, if I had followed the crowd, I would not be here today. Now let me take you deeper. There is a story from the 1973-74 crisis that I have carried with me all my life, a business I had admired for years. Washington Post was being priced by the market as if it was collapsing. But it wasn't collapsing. The business was sound, the brand was strong, the numbers were real, but the fear around it was so loud that people weren't willing to think. Katharine Graham, the woman who ran the company, was under tremendous pressure. People doubted her. People underestimated her. People questioned her leadership, but she held steady. She trusted the core of her business even when the market didn't. When I analyzed the company, I saw something extraordinary. The stock was selling for a quarter of what the business was worth. Fear had discounted the truth. Panic had created a window. Emotion had created mispricing. So I bought. Not a little, a lot, and that investment returned more than 15 times our money. Remember what I'm about to tell you. Crises do not destroy wealth. Crises transfer wealth from the impatient to the patient, from the emotional to the rational, from the crowd to the few who are willing to think while everyone else reacts. And that is why today's lesson matters so much, because your second million will not come from surviving crises. It will come from capitalizing on them. And now that you understand where my philosophy comes from, my experiences, my failures, my fears, the storms I've lived through, and the clarity they forced me to develop, we can finally begin the first of the three ways. The first way is simple, powerful, and universally accessible. It is the same principle that turned the Washington Post investment into a fortune. The same principle that helped me invest in Coca-Cola when the world ignored it. Same principle that helped me find opportunities in the middle of every downturn. My friends, now that you understand where my philosophy comes from, those early storms, those moments of fear, those crises that shaped the way I think, it's time to talk about the first way to turn a crisis into your second million. And this first way is the one that built the foundation of my wealth more than anything else. It is simple, but not easy. It is obvious, but rarely practiced. It is available to everyone, yet mastered by almost no one. You make real money in crises by buying wonderful businesses at crisis prices. Let me say that again, slowly, because this is not a slogan. This is the central engine behind almost everything I've done for 7 decades. You buy wonderful businesses, not average businesses, not fragile businesses, not companies built on hype or advertisement or momentum. Wonderful businesses, ones that solve real problems, deliver real value, and can survive storms without losing their character. But you buy them when fear has forced the market to price them like broken, hopeless enterprises. When the world is panicking, prices become disconnected from reality, sometimes wildly so. A business worth $1 per share might fall to $40. A business earning billions may trade like it is headed for bankruptcy. And if you understand value, true value, not what the market tells you value is, you will see windows open that the rest of the world is too blind to notice. Let me tell you a story from 1973-74, because that crisis taught me more about this principle than any textbook ever could. The stock market had fallen nearly 50%. The entire economy was shaking. Inflation was high, confidence was low, and the average investor was exhausted. People weren't thinking about opportunity. They were thinking about survival. I spent those years reading annual reports, studying businesses, understanding fundamentals, while most people were reading the newspaper headlines instead. And one day, I arrived at the valuation of the Washington Post company. The stock was selling at a market value of around $80 million. But when I sat down and analyzed the assets, the earnings, the brand, the long-term prospects, the actual value of the business was well over $400 million. Think about that, a $400 million business selling for only $80 million, a wonderful business temporarily disguised as a failing one. Fear had created a hallucination, and hallucinations make millionaires when you have the courage to look past them. So I bought shares, a lot of them, and not because I had some magic ability to predict the future. I didn't. I invested because I could see that fear had pushed the price far below reality. And that gap between price and value, that mispricing, is the gift that crises hand to those willing to keep their eyes open. That one investment returned more than 15 times our money. One decision, made in a moment when the world said, "Don't buy anything," turned into a fortune simply because I trusted value over noise. But let me take you to another storm, one much closer to your time. In 2008, the financial world was collapsing. Lehman Brothers fell. Banks were shaking. Businesses were desperate. People who had spent 30 years saving watched their retirement accounts fall by a third, sometimes more. The panic was so strong you could feel it just by walking down a street. Now imagine this. While most people were selling everything they had, I was sitting in my office reading balance sheets, looking for mispricing, searching for wonderful businesses temporarily misunderstood. I wasn't excited. I wasn't celebrating the chaos. I wasn't smiling while the world was hurting. But I understood something fundamental. You don't get wonderful businesses at bargain prices in calm times. You get them in storms. Let me share a moment that few people know. In 2008, I got a call from a very large company, I won't name it here, one that was shaken by the chaos and needed support to stay afloat. Their leaders were terrified. They had watched their stock fall like a stone. They had watched customers hesitate. They had watched everything they built suddenly feel fragile. But when I looked beneath the fear, the business itself was still wonderful. Strong brand, strong customer base, strong value proposition. The world was terrified, but the fundamentals were still standing. So I invested, and that investment, made in the darkest hours of the crisis, didn't just pay off, it multiplied. Why? Because the price was driven by fear, not by logic, and fear is the greatest mispricer in the history of markets. You see, when times are good and confidence is high, everyone wants to buy stock. Everyone feels smart. Everyone is optimistic, and optimism inflates prices until even average businesses look expensive. But during crises, real crises, wonderful businesses can fall right alongside the weak ones, simply because fear does not discriminate. Your job is to discriminate when others cannot. Your job is to think when others react. Your job is to separate temporary noise from long-term value. Let me explain something that will change your life if you truly understand it. A crisis does not change a wonderful business. It changes people's perception of it. Think of Coca-Cola. Think of Apple. Think of Costco. Think of Johnson & Johnson. Think of American Express. These companies don't stop being wonderful just because panic is in the air. The buildings don't vanish. The employees don't disappear. The customers don't suddenly stop wanting the product. Fear changes the price, not the quality. And once you understand that, you begin to see crises in a completely different light. You stop seeing them as earthquakes. You start seeing them as clearance sales. Now, here's the part people often miss. Buying wonderful businesses at crisis discounts is not just about getting a good deal. It's about positioning yourself for the surge that follows every crisis. After every storm in history comes a recovery. After every panic comes stability. After every period of fear comes a period of reflection and growth. If you bought during the crisis, you rise with the tide. If you waited until the calm returned, you missed the wave entirely. Let me give you an example from the modern world, 2020. During the early days of the pandemic, fear was everywhere. Uncertainty was thick in the air. People were rushing to sell at any price. Businesses with strong balance sheets saw their stocks fall 30%, 40%, in some cases 50%. And those who understood value were able to buy into these companies at prices that likely will never appear again in our lifetime. Look at Apple, look at Amazon, look at Starbucks, look at Nike, look at McDonald's. These weren't broken businesses. These were interrupted businesses, but panic priced them as if they were dying. And the people who understood what I am teaching you right, now the people who looked past the headlines and focused on fundamentals, those people bought their future million at a discount. My friends, let me tell you something with the full weight of 95 years behind it. Your second million will rarely be built in calm times. It will be built in moments when others are too scared to see the truth. Your future wealth is hiding inside undervalued opportunities that appear only during crises. But only if you prepare yourself to recognize them. When you see fear, don't run. When you see panic, don't freeze. When you see prices collapsing, don't assume value is collapsing. Instead, ask the question that has guided me for nearly a century. Is this a wonderful business temporarily disguised by fear? If the answer is yes, then you are looking at a doorway to your second million, and that brings us to the next lesson. Because buying wonderful businesses is only the beginning, the second way to capitalize on crises is what will turn those wonderful businesses into engines of unstoppable growth. And in part 3, I will teach you how to use crises to accelerate your cash flow investments, the secret behind building wealth that works even while you sleep. My friends, now that you understand the first way to turn crisis into your second million buying wonderful businesses at crisis prices, it's time to move to the second way. This one is quieter, often ignored, and yet it is one of the strongest wealth builders I've ever known. It is the reason why my wealth continues to grow even when I sleep, even when I'm away from my desk, even when the world is going through storms I cannot control. And I want you to listen carefully, because if you learn this one skill, you will never fear a crisis again. When the world is in a panic, when the headlines are terrifying, when people are selling anything they can just to feel safe, that is when the smartest investors increase their cash flow assets. Not decrease, increase. Cash flow investments are different from buying businesses purely for appreciation. These are investments that pay you money regularly quarter after quarter, year after year, without requiring you to swing the bat every day. These are investments that work for you while the world panics. They calm the nerves, strengthen your position, and build a base of income that grows through crises, not just after them. Let me explain something that took me decades to fully internalize. Capital gains build wealth, but cash flow sustains wealth. People often think that when markets go down, dividends will dry up. But the history of the world says something quite different. Strong companies with durable earnings continue paying dividends through recessions, through crashes, through depressions, through every kind of economic weather. Sometimes they even increase their payouts at the exact moment when the rest of the world feels like it is falling apart. Let me tell you a story about Coca-Cola. When I first invested in Coca-Cola, it wasn't during a panic. It wasn't during a crisis. It was after a period of recovery. But what made that investment extraordinary was not just the appreciation of the stock price. It was the dividends. In the beginning, Coca-Cola paid us $75 million per year in dividends. That was impressive. But over time, as the business grew and the dividends increased, Coca-Cola began paying us more than $700 million per year. Think about that. One investment, a stream of cash that grew tenfold with time, and the real magic is this: dividends kept flowing through every crisis after we bought it. In 2000, when the dot-com bubble burst, Coke kept paying. In 2008, when the world collapsed, Coke kept paying. In 2020, when the globe shut down, Coke kept paying. And that cash flow didn't just build wealth. It allowed me to act when others could not. Because when people panic, the first thing they lose is cash flow. When you lose cash flow, you lose options. And when you lose options, you lose the ability to capitalize on crisis opportunities. Cash flow is oxygen. Without it, you cannot breathe during a storm. This is why crisis dividends are so powerful. As prices fall, yields rise. A company that pays $4 per share in dividends may be yielding 2% when the stock price is high. But when the market falls and that price drops, the same dividend might suddenly yield 3%, 4%, even 5% or more. Fear pushes prices down, but dividends stay the same. and that means your cash flow becomes richer and more valuable during a crisis than during any other time. This is why I increase my exposure to dividend-paying companies, rates with strong balance sheets, and businesses with stable cash flow models during downturns. It isn't because I'm chasing yields. It's because I'm building a financial engine that works regardless of what the market is doing. Now let me tell you something important, something most people never understand until it's too late. Your second million is rarely built from appreciation alone. It is built from appreciation plus cash flow. Appreciation is the turbo engine. Cash flow is the fuel keeping the engine alive. If you build a portfolio that pays you $20, $0, $0, $40, $0, $0, $60, $0, $0 a year in dividends and cash distributions, then during every crisis, you won't be the person panicking. You'll be the person buying while others are selling. You'll be the person planting while others are burning their fields. You'll be the person accumulating assets while others are running from them. And if you want to know where the real financial power comes from, it comes from this. Cash flow buys you time. Cash flow buys you patience. Cash flow buys you courage. Because when the world is on fire and your income continues to flow, you no longer see crises as something to fear. You see them as something to wait through and something to capitalize on. That brings me to the third way to turn crises into your second million. And this one is more psychological than financial, but without this mindset, no amount of knowledge or strategy can help you build real wealth. During every crisis in history, there have always been two groups of people. The first group retreats. They pull back, they shrink, they cut their spending, cut their investments, cut their ambitions. They tell themselves they're being careful. But what they're actually doing is surrendering their future to fear. The second group does something very different. They move in the opposite direction of the crowd, not recklessly, not blindly, but deliberately. They expand while others retreat. They grow while others pause. They build while others wait. And because they do this, they emerge from the crisis miles ahead of those who froze in place. Let me give you a story from my own life. During the 2008 crisis, many companies were desperate for liquidity. They were strong businesses with strong futures, but in that moment they needed capital, and because the world was scared, very few people were willing to step in. I stepped in. I invested in Goldman Sachs. I invested in Bank of America. I invested in General Electric. Not because I wanted to take advantage of suffering, but because I knew these companies were strong, and the crisis had temporarily pushed them into a corner. I provided capital not to catch falling knives, but to support great institutions that the world was temporarily misjudging. When the crisis ended, those investments paid off extraordinarily, not because I was lucky, not because I was fearless, but because I was willing to do something simple. When others retreat, move forward carefully, thoughtfully, boldly. This principle applies to far more than markets. It applies to your business. It applies to your career. It applies to the way you make decisions in life. Crisis creates openings that only appear once every few years. Jobs become open that would never open otherwise. Businesses get sold at valuations nobody would imagine in normal times. Real estate prices soften. Competition slows down. Advertising costs drop. Partnerships become possible. While the world is tightening, you expand. While the world is whispering caution, you speak in action. While the world is frozen, you move with intention. This is how fortunes are built. Not just the first million. Anyone can get lucky once. I'm talking about the second, third, fourth million and beyond. The fortunes built not from chance, but from consistent courage multiplied across many crises. And now, my friends, after nearly a century of watching the world rise and fall, I want to leave you with a truth many people never fully understand until they're old enough to wish they had learned it earlier. Crises are inevitable. They come without warning. They shake the world. They test your character. They reveal your weaknesses, and they expose your strengths. But crises also carry gifts for those who know how to look for them. A crisis will give you a chance to buy wonderful businesses at prices you will never see again. A crisis will give you the opportunity to build cash flow engines that work even when the world is trembling. A crisis will give you the chance to expand when others retreat, to rise when others fall, to claim ground that the fearful abandon. Your second million is not built in comfort or calm. It is built in chaos. Your job is not to predict the next crisis. Your job is to prepare for it, to think while others react, to see value while others see panic, to step forward while others step back. And when the next storm arrives, and it will remember what I've told you, inside every crisis is a doorway. Most people run past it, but a few stop, look, think, and walk through. Those are the people who build lasting wealth. Those are the people who make their second million, and if you are ready, the next crisis might be your moment.